tackle this issue?
Ashton.
Our emergency service staff do amazing work every day, keeping the people of Scotland safe and well, often under challenging circumstances, and they fully deserve our thanks and gratitude, particularly at this time of year when demand on services can be very high. And the Government is committed to doing all it can to support our emergency services in actions that they take to reduce instances of hoax calls, such as working closely with partners and local communities to reduce false alarms and increase understanding of the impact of these calls. The Scottish Ambulance Service use social media to advise patients during periods of high demand to only call the service if it is an emergency, as part of their winter communications plan, and they will be warning of the impact of hoax calls through that plan.
Thank you. Question to Gail Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it supports exports of renewable energy technology.
Minister Ivan McKee.
Thanks to the commitment and targets introduced by the Scottish Government and the expertise and entrepreneurialism of our energy sector, Scotland is already a global centre of excellence in renewables. Scottish Renewables Report, Scotland's Green Energy Export Impact, published earlier this year, highlighted that Scottish renewable energy businesses are already exporting to 72 countries. The Scottish Onshore Wind Energy Council, co-chaired by my colleague Mr Wheelhouse, is not only looking to maximise supply chain content of Scottish and UK projects, but also how to support the supply chain to compete for overseas contracts, and they've already engaged with administrations in California, Massachusetts and New Jersey regarding offshore wind opportunities. We want to build on this success and to grow a successful and competitive global supply chain.
Gail Ross.
Thank the Minister for that answer. Can he outline what support is given to small and medium-sized businesses in the sector, such as GIGC Engineering in my constituency?
Minister.
I thank Gail Ross for that supplementary, and as it happens, I met with GIGC Engineering in Boston when I was there recently with a delegation of Scottish renewable energy businesses looking to export to Massachusetts. There was a very successful meeting between myself and the Governor of Massachusetts, Charlie Baker, in this connection to promote the technology we can export from Scotland, and Scottish businesses, including in the renewable energy sector, are supported through the additional £20 million over the next 3 years that the Scottish Government is investing to grow Scottish exports around the world.
Neil Findlay.
I'm pleased to hear we're investing to grow exports around the world, but what's the Minister doing to ensure that wind turbines and wind energy projects in Scotland are supplied by companies from Scotland instead of the farcical situation where we see turbines being imported from Indonesia to Fife and only a few yards away the BiFab yard standing empty?
Minister.
Mr Findlay will be aware the Scottish Government stepped in to support BiFab. We are working with them to identify opportunities. We are identifying where we can support them with getting contracts. At the end of the day, this is commercial business, but we are also taking very seriously any suggestions that there is unfair competition, and we are looking to support and intervene to identify and make those in any regard to anything that is deemed as unfair competition internationally. But the Scottish Government is hugely focused on the sector. We want to build the supply chain up, and as I said, our intervention in BiFab is precisely for that reason, to ensure that we maintain the opportunity and the technology in Scotland, and to support where we can to work with private sector businesses to invest in Scottish supply chain to provide jobs in Scotland in the renewable energy sector.
And Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Minister outline the sort of policies that the UK Government has so far failed to deliver that would incentivise investment in renewable technology?
Minister.
Scotland's technology is in a world-leading position, and I came just this morning from an event at the City of Glasgow College talking with international opportunities about how we can further export that technology. The UK Government, however, hasn't been helpful in that regard, and the member will know that their failure to follow through on the carbon capture scheme and the way they've changed the contracts for difference so that onshore wind isn't supported has not helped Scotland's drive to support our renewable energy sector and use the technology, the world-leading technology that we have, to develop and export more internationally.
Question 3, David Torrance.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what progress it is making in developing a draft statutory code of practice for funeral directors.
Minister Joe Fitzpatrick.
The Scottish Government is committed to ensuring that everyone in Scotland receives the care, dignity and respect in death that they would wish in life. Although there are no statutory regulations of funeral directors or their businesses in any part of the UK, we are working to change that in Scotland by introducing new statutory standards for funeral directors, underpinned by a licensing and inspection regime. Earlier this year, I published the Funeral Director Code of Practice for consultation. Once finalised, the code will set out statutory standards for funeral directors, which must be complied with. This will be a significant step forward in ensuring consistency of standard of care across Scotland. The analysis of the consultation responses will be available early next year, and the code itself will be published later next year.
David Torrance.
Following recent reports of alleged fraudulent scheme linked to 5 funeral directors, which has impacted on a number of my constituents, can the Cabinet Secretary clarify whether financial regulation for industry is under consideration for inclusion as part of any future code of conduct?
Minister.
The Scottish Government believes that the regulation of the prepaid funeral market plan should be strengthened. As a reserved matter, we are urging the UK Government to take action to ensure that there is sufficient protection in place for people taking out funeral plans, and will continue to call on the UK Government to take action in this area. The Scottish Government Code of Practice focuses on raising standards of transparency of service offered by funeral directors and standards of care of people who have died.
Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As the Cabinet Secretary has said, the purpose of the draft statutory code of practice is to ensure that every person in Scotland has a dignified and respectful funeral. How will a newly developed funeral support payment ensure that this is the case even for those who struggle to pay for funerals?
Minister.
Thank the member for the question. The funeral support payment is there to help people on low-income benefits who might otherwise struggle to pay for a funeral. We've substantially widened eligibility for the payment compared to the former DWP payment, and will help 40% more people each year. In total, around 5,000 people each year will receive support. Moreover, we've developed the new funeral support payment in line with our social security principles to treat all clients with dignity, fairness and respect.
Question number 4, John Mason.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to reduce the amount of time that the police spend assisting people with mental health issues on matters that should not require their presence.
Minister Claire Hawkey.
Firstly, I would like to thank the member for raising this important issue. The Scottish Government, Police Scotland and partners are committed to working together to ensure that the right service can provide the right response for individuals experiencing mental ill health. It is widely recognised that Police Scotland plays a significant role in assisting and safeguarding individuals who present to services in emotional or mental health distress, or who are vulnerable in a variety of ways. We have a collective responsibility to address the complex issues which arise from mental ill health. Police Scotland are working hard with partners to gain a clear picture of mental health demand, so we can fully understand the demand that this places upon our frontline officers, and importantly, so we can work together to deliver the best outcomes for individuals. We are continuing to deliver on the commitments set out in our programme for government to develop a 21st century approach to adult mental health, including our intention to establish a new adult mental health collaborative, the creation of the new multi-agency distress intervention group to develop and oversee new approaches to improving collaborative responses to distress, and we are on course to deliver our commitment of 800 additional mental health workers in 4 priority settings: A&E, GP practices, custody suites and prisons.
John Mason.
I thank the Minister very much for that answer. I'm glad there's progress being made. But as I spent a day with the police in August, this subject came up repeatedly. And for example, if a police officer takes someone with mental health issues to accident and emergency, they then have to stay at accident and emergency with the person. And that could be for some time. And I just wonder if there is not another system that somebody from the health service could take over and release the police officers.
Minister.
As I stated in my response earlier to John Mason, we know that police officers often play a significant and valuable role in assisting those in mental health distress. However, it is crucial we develop a strong collaborative approach with public services, the third sector and communities working together to improve support for those with mental ill health. Police Scotland's new call handling approach is currently being rolled out across Scotland and is already helping the service to respond more effectively to demand, putting resource where it is most needed and ensuring that people receive the support that best meets their needs. Working with other partners to address risk and vulnerability is a key feature of this approach. Additionally, a new mental health hub service has been operational since March 2019 and it delivers dedicated support to people contacting Police Scotland in mental health distress, where calls are referred to psychological wellbeing practitioners. The Distress Intervention Group I mentioned in my previous answer, of which Police Scotland are a key partner, will provide strategic leadership across the Scottish justice, health and social care sector to ensure that more effective pathways are available to people presenting to public services in distress.
And David Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Could I endorse Mr Mason's concerns? Will the Minister examine again the supply and availability of medium and low secure facilities for those with serious mental health issues, as raised at the Health and Sport Committee this week?
Minister.
I thank Mr Stewart for that question. He will be aware that we currently have a review into all of our forensic mental health services led by Derek Barron, which we expect to report in the summer of next year. The remit of that review covers both high, low and medium and community forensic mental health services.
And question number 5, Jackie Baillie.
To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to concerns that the out-of-hours services at the Vale of Leven, Inverclyde Royal and Royal Alexandra hospitals are not functioning effectively.
Cabinet Secretary Jean Freeman.
I agree that the current situation isn't acceptable and I am aware of the challenges faced by Glasgow's out-of-hours services. These out-of-hours services covering Greater Glasgow and Clyde are currently under review and as part of that, Glasgow are recruiting 70 salaried GPs to work in the service. Recruitment started in early September this year and they have so far recruited 7 salaried GPs. It is important that Glasgow continue recruiting at pace to fill these posts and that they take on board the advice they have commissioned from Sir Lewis Ritchie on how to deliver a more sustainable out-of-hours service.
Jackie Baillie.
The Cabinet Secretary for that response. Out of hours at the Vale of Leven has been closed from January to September this year for 128 days alone, and there have been more closures in October and November. In fact, it's closed more often than it's actually open, and there are problems at Inverclyde and the Royal Alexandra Hospital in Paisley. The result is that people end up at A&E when they don't need to go there, and waiting times increase. The Cabinet Secretary, I am sure, will share my frustration that NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde seem incapable of organising out-of-hours rotas. What can she do to ensure that this most basic of emergency services is provided in my local area?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm grateful to Ms Baillie for her supplementary question. She will recall when I visited Vale of Leven and with her and with others there, we had what I thought was a very productive discussion with local GPs about the work that they currently undertake and how they could expand that. I would share her disappointment that we have not yet seen that realised. I do think those local discussions are the route by which we can resolve some of these out-of-hours matters. I couldn't agree more with her that if out-of-hours doesn't work, along with the other areas that people can go to in terms of pharmacy first and the use of NHS 24, then actually what we see is unscheduled care that is appropriate appearing at our A&Es as opposed to the current situation driven often by people not knowing where else to go. So I am prepared today in the Chamber to make my commitment to Ms Baillie that I will not only pursue the discussions that I thought we had productively had at Vale of Leven, but I will also be talking to Greater Glasgow and Clyde on this, as of course on other matters, about exactly how they are proposing to improve their out-of-hours service and its delivery. And I'm happy to keep Ms Baillie updated on that.
Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, does the Cabinet Secretary consider it unacceptable that GPs from Inverclyde are regularly used to cover elsewhere within the Health Board area, but the reciprocal arrangements don't seem to apply, in addition to the most recent figures from the Health Board revealing that out-of-hours service closed 40 times in the whole of 2018, with that rising to 77 up to the 17th of November this year alone?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm grateful to Mr McMillan. No, so I don't consider it unacceptable that GPs across a cohort of areas, for example, Greater Glasgow and Clyde, cooperate and help cover for each other. What isn't acceptable is if that is not reciprocal and cooperative. So again, as part of what I have said in response to Ms Baillie, I will pick this up with Greater Glasgow and Clyde and look to see, and indeed, in fact, with the BMA GP committee, who I think we have productive relationships with, to ask what more can be done in order to ensure that there is that reciprocity and that willingness to ensure that there is cover across the piece. But the core of this is actually to fix it out of our service in Greater Glasgow and Clyde.
Thank you. Question number 6, Alison Harris.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government when it last met NHS Forth Valley to discuss the board's performance.
Cabinet Secretary Jean Freeman.
I met the Chair and Chief Executive of NHS Forth Valley on Monday the 2nd of December when I chaired the board's mid-year review.
Alison Harris.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her answer. In December last year, NHS Forth Valley was escalated to level 3 on the NHS Board Performance Escalation Framework, requiring tailored support. Whilst there have been improvements in A&E waiting times, and Forth Valley is no longer level 3 on the framework, in 2018-19 it missed 6 of its 8 national waiting times targets, and the areas which seemed to be improving have begun to slip again. 1 year on from the last escalation, is the Cabinet Secretary confident that Forth Valley will not be escalated again within a year?
Cabinet Secretary.
So I'm grateful to Ms Harris for her supplementary question. It is really important to understand that we do not escalate boards lightly, and when we do, it is about providing the additional tailored support that they need in order to help them improve their performance. Of course, that tailored support ranges from what might be there at level 2 or 3 to what might be the case at level 5, where our intervention is much more direct. She is right, in terms of Forth Valley, there have been improvements in A&E. There have also been very welcome improvements in their 31-day cancer target, with the most recent figures showing 100% meeting of that target. The discussion that we had on Monday was what more they are doing to improve on their 62-day target. TTG is improving, but in terms of outpatients, there is more to be done. So at this point, my focus is on making sure that the board have the right plans in place, the right recruitment options in place, the right financial performance, in order to ensure that when I do their next annual review, we have seen considerable improvements in their performance.
Gil Patterson.
Many thanks, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary will be aware that a Labour MSP has attacked the Golden Jubilee Hospital in my constituency for using a mobile cath lab on a temporary basis, as is done throughout the United Kingdom. Is it not an utter disgrace that Labour are willing to undermine this hospital, which has an exemplary record, and put vulnerable people in doubt at the worst time in their lives? That's having a heart attack, which could cause them not to report the heart attack speedily, thus putting their lives in jeopardy.
I'm not entirely sure that hospital is in the Forth Valley, but Cabinet Secretary can give a very brief answer, please.
Well, in fact, Golden Jubilee does cover patients from the Forth Valley area, so, and I do agree with the member. I really do think members need to decide, do you want us to focus on delivering high-quality patient care in a timely fashion, or do you want to make political points because NHS in Scotland is doing what NHS in Wales is doing, what NHS in England is doing, and that is ensuring that we have the resources on time, in place, in order to deliver that quality? Personally, I'm interested in delivering high-quality patient care, not cheap political points.
Thank you. And on that note, we'll conclude general questions and turn to First Minister's questions. Question 1, Jackson Carlaw.
Presiding Officer, Scotland's Programme for International Student Assessment, PISA, results for science and maths have never been lower than those released this week. Have they, First Minister?
First Minister.
Compared to the last PISA study, the performance in science and maths, according to independent statisticians, is stable, but that's not good enough in my view. We want to continue with the efforts to see significant improvement in maths and science, as we have seen significant improvement in reading performance recorded in the most recent PISA study. After the last study, of course, we had the Scottish Attainment Challenge, the People Equity Fund, initiatives like the First Minister's Reading Challenge to focus on literacy and reading. That is bearing fruit. What we are doing is working, and will continue to bring the same focus to maths and science as well.
Jackson Carlo.
You know, I welcome the figures in reading, but it's a little bit like people celebrating the fact they've just had their kitchen redecorated when the front 2 rooms in the house are on fire. The simple answer was no. They have never been lower. In fact, in science, the drop in performance is the biggest seen since 2003. First Minister, in the period since the SNP first came to office, how many of the 40 OECD and UK countries have experienced a bigger fall in standards, in science, than we have in Scotland? How many?
First Minister. I am not standing here saying that the performance in maths or in science is, for me or for the Scottish Government, acceptable. I'm not saying that in any way, shape or form. But after we saw a significant decline in this study, we have seen a performance that is stabilised, and we now intend to bring to bear the initiatives and interventions that will see a similar improvement in maths and science to the improvement that we have seen in this survey in reading and literacy. I think that is the focus that a government should bring. Of course, as we've discussed in this chamber on many occasions in the past, when we look at the broader indicators in Scottish education, whether that is on higher passes or National 5 passes, we see a picture that is of improving standards and, crucially, a closing of the attainment gap, something that is also reflected in the most recent PISA study as well. So the Government will continue to be focused on delivering these improvements, similar improvements to the ones that we have already been delivering in reading, to science and maths, and we will get on with that job.
Jackson Carlo.
Presiding Officer, only in the First Minister's world can it conceivably be the case that the biggest fall in standards since 2003 is stability. First Minister, the answer to the question of how many others have seen a bigger fall was one. Just one country out of 40 has seen standards in science fall further since 2006. And in maths, Scotland has experienced the 5th biggest fall. But it's the SNP's response, something that we've just heard, which has been almost as alarming as the results themselves. 3 years ago, Nicola Sturgeon said the PISA results were not good enough and I want to see them improve. This time, we've just heard denial. Here's what Professor Lindsay Patterson of Edinburgh University says. These results would make any parent wince with shame. Even worse is the disgraceful political spin which the Scottish Government has struggled to impose on them. As those behind you laugh at this record, First Minister, how is your government going to get on top of this when it simply refuses to accept the facts?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, in describing maths and science as stable, I'm quoting independent statisticians, and that is just the facts. If I was standing here and saying I thought that was acceptable or job done or enough, Jackson Carlo might have a point. I am not doing that. We have brought a focus to bear since the last PISA survey on reading and literacy. We see a significant and a very sharp increase in performance there, to the point that where, again, according to the independent statisticians, there are only 5 countries that are now performing better than Scotland. And we are bringing that same focus to bear on maths and science. We have a range of initiatives, changes to the curriculum, the STEM bursary, encouraging career changers to come into teaching STEM subjects, because we are determined to see the same improvement we have recorded in reading in science and maths, and together with the wider activity that's leading to that improvement in higher performance, more young people leaving school with a higher, more young people leaving school with the gold standard of 5 hires, more young people going into positive destinations. We will continue to keep that focus, whatever the Scottish Conservatives might want to throw at us and the pupils and teachers across Scotland in the process.
Jackson Carlo.
Officer, this is an even more lamentable response than I expected from a First Minister who wanted to be judged on education. And today it's all across our newspapers what the people of Scotland think of her handling of public services. In schools, hospitals and justice, where only this morning the chair of the Scottish Police Authority has resigned, confidence is plummeting. After the last set of PISA results, John Swinney told us this SNP's government's unwavering focus, their unwavering focus, would be on improving our schools. But Nicola Sturgeon's unwavering focus has not been improving our schools, but on forcing another independence referendum on Scotland. How much more government failure does Scotland have to endure before you drop this obsession and get on with your job?
First Minister.
Well, when we took office, less than half of pupils in Scotland left school with a higher qualification. Now almost two-thirds leave school with a higher qualification. When we took office, just over 20% left school with the gold standard of 5 hires. That is now over 30%. When we look at the household survey of those with direct experience of their schools, 86% say that they are satisfied with the quality of education. I don't think that's job done, but that is an indication of the focus and the progress that we are and will continue to deliver. And lastly, Presiding Officer, I think it is a bit rich for Jackson Carlaw as the representative of the party that has imposed a decade of austerity on Scotland to stand up here and talk about the quality of public services. What we need to take the opportunity to get rid of over the next few days is a Conservative government. That's the best thing we could do for public services the length and breadth of our country.
Question number 2, Richard Leonard.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what her response is to comments by Susan Deacon, who has this morning resigned her post as Chair of the Scottish Police Authority, saying that, and I quote her, the governance and accountability arrangements for policing in Scotland are fundamentally flawed in structure, culture and practice.
Well, First Minister. Firstly, can I confirm that Susan Deacon has tendered her resignation? I am very grateful for the work that she's done over the past 2 years as Chair of the SPA. Parliament will be interested to know that the Justice Secretary has spoken with the SPA Vice Chair, David Crichton, who's agreed to take on the leadership of the SPA until a new chair is appointed through the full public appointments process. In terms of Susan Deacon's comments, obviously I do thank her and pay tribute to the work that she has done. I don't agree with that. I would point to the comments, her own comment, of course, in her letter of resignation, where, and I think I'm quoting her here, when she says she leaves this role with her police service in a much stronger place than it was 2 years ago. I also point to the recent HMICS report, where it said that there is now a consensus from key post holders in the SPA, Police Scotland and other stakeholders that the 2012 Act establishes the right model of governance of police and that the functions of the SPA are sound. The Chief Inspector of Constabulary also stated recently that the SPA has the strongest board that it has ever had in the mixture of experience and depth of experience in a number of different walks of life and professions. So we will continue to take forward, the SPA will continue to take forward the changes and reforms that indeed the subcommittee of this Parliament has recommended so that it continues to strengthen its performance.
Richard Leonard.
Well, the First Minister is right in saying that in September of this year, Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary in Scotland did publish a report on the Scottish Police Authority. But that's about where it stops, because it found that the SPA is failing to hold the Chief Constable to account. It found that it was failing to facilitate local scrutiny and failing on transparency. And the report concluded that there is a fundamental conflict of interest in the SPA being both a service provider to and the scrutiny body of Police Scotland. It made absolutely clear that police scrutiny was in need of radical overhaul. So what action did the First Minister take between the publication of the Inspectorate's report and Susan Deacon's resignation today to ensure that Police Scotland is subject to adequate scrutiny?
First Minister.
As I'm sure Richard Leonard is aware, the SPA is taking forward changes to address the issues that have been raised both by Her Majesty's Inspectorate and also by the subcommittee of this Parliament to address issues of leadership, governance and accountability. There is progress being made in all of that, but that does not take away from the conclusion that the functions of the SPA are sound and that the model of governance of the police service by an independent police authority is the right one. And I point again in terms of Richard Leonard's question about progress in giving evidence to the Justice Committee this week, on Tuesday the 3rd of December, the Chief Inspector of Constabulary stated that the SPA now has, and I'm quoting here, the strongest board that it has ever had in the real mixture of experience and depth of experience in a number of different walks of life and profession. So yes, issues have been raised in the lifetime of the SPE. These issues are being addressed and will continue to be addressed, and I would hope Richard Leonard would welcome that.
Richard Leonard.
Well, First Minister, for the last 2 weeks, you've toured the TV studios up and down the UK, boasting about your record in government. But this week, we have had confirmation that our GP practices are in crisis, that your Education Secretary is failing teachers and failing to provide the quality education that our young people deserve, and now today, Police Scotland has been plunged into crisis. And this comes on top. This comes on top of recent warnings from senior police officers that further cuts will be made in police numbers to meet current budgetary limits at a time when violent crime is rising in Scotland. So, First Minister, the SNP has been in office for 12 years. When will you finally take the opportunity to take responsibility, to apologise to the people and accept that none of Scotland's public services can be trusted in your government's hands?
First Minister.
Of course, crime is lower than it was when the SNP took office. It is at one of its lowest levels in decades now. And of course, we have invested in ensuring that there are 1,000 more police officers on the streets of Scotland. I know that Richard Leonard is quite happy for Scotland to be governed by a Tory government, but at the time we've been investing in 1,000 more police officers, they've been slashing police numbers by 20,000. So this government will continue to invest in our public services. We will continue to take forward essential reforms in our public services, which is why the people of Scotland will continue, I believe, to put their trust in the SNP and in this Scottish Government to get on with the job that we're doing.
Thank you. We have some constituency supplementary questions. The first from Christine Graham.
Well, thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the First Minister share my concern that Borderline Helpline, supporting my constituents who are experiencing mental health problems, which has received 90,000 calls since it began 20 years ago, has been given 6 months' notice that it will lose all its funding, shared between NHS Borders and Tory-led Scottish Borders Council, despite independent valuations, including that of SBC, considering it exceptional value for money, compounded by no consultation? Does she agree that there should be a full consultation and any decision on funding should be suspended at the very least until the impact of closure is assessed?
First Minister.
Well, services like this perform a very important function, and I would certainly encourage local councils to undertake full consultation and make sure that they're considering all of the implications of these decisions. I will ask the Health Secretary to look at this from the perspective of the Health Service to see whether there is more that the Government can offer by way of assistance, but I certainly hope the local council will take seriously the issues that Christine Graham has raised today.
Edward Mountain, to be followed by Beatrice Wishart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, in 2015, I welcomed your government's announcement of a much-needed £16 million facility in Inverness. Work was due to start this summer and then was delayed till the end of 2019 with a price tag that had more than doubled. I wrote to the Cabinet Secretary for Health 7 weeks ago asking about this facility and, despite 2 chasing emails, have yet to receive a response. Given the orthopaedic waiting times in the Highlands now exceed 78 weeks, I and my constituents would like to know when work will start on the elective care centre for the north of Scotland and when it will be operational.
First Minister.
Well, I understand the Health Secretary has written to the member, but if he hasn't received that, I'm happy to look into that to make sure that that letter arrives with him. We are delivering a number of elective treatment centres across the country as part of our waiting times improvement plan to make sure that we are building the capacity to ensure that the rising demand in the NHS can be met, and I'll make sure that the member gets the response from the Health Secretary as quickly as possible.
Beatrice Wishart, to be followed by Angus MacDonald.
Thank you. Yesterday, people in Shetland and Orkney were appalled to learn that there's been a second legal challenge to the awarding of the Northern Isles ferry service contract. That's on top of an 18-month delay. Some people in the community are now questioning the competence of Transport Scotland. What reassurances can the First Minister give that the Government is doing all it can to resolve the dispute quickly, to limit the uncertainty over the future of a lifeline ferry service upon which people and businesses in the Northern Isles depend?
First Minister.
Well, I share Beatrice Wishart's concerns about this. Obviously, as she says, this is now a legal action, and therefore it would not be appropriate for me to go into detail about these issues. Suffice to say, the Scottish Government is confident in the processes that we have undertaken and will continue to defend that position rigorously.
Angus MacDonald.
The First Minister will be aware of the major gas outage that affected parts of Falkirk District from Sunday and through the first half of the week. Currently, less than 250 of the 8,000 plus households affected remain unconnected today. Will the First Minister join me in congratulating everyone involved in the Herculean effort to get people reconnected? Not only the 300 gas engineers and support staff from SGN and beyond who descended on Falkirk District over the past few days, but also the multi-agency response from the Police, Scottish Fire and Rescue, NHS Forth Valley and the Ambulance Service, Falkirk Council Social Services and the Housing Departments, and not forgetting the community effort, who all deserve praise for the way the multi-agency approach has been handled.
First Minister.
Yes, I would take this opportunity to thank everybody who responded so promptly to ensure that the fault was repaired quickly and the process to safely reconnect customers, which of course required engineers to visit all affected properties, was able to happen in the timescale that it did. It is now close to completion. Any home that is currently not back on the mains gas supply is due to engineers not being able to access properties, and I'm advised that as of 7 p.m. on the 4th of December that was reported to be around 80 properties. But everybody here involved, to use Angus MacDonald's term, did a Herculean effort, and I think everybody is to be congratulated. This was obviously inconvenient for everybody affected, but it could have been much worse in terms of the time taken to fix it, and my thanks go to everybody who ensured that it was done so quickly.
Thank you. Question 3, Patrick Harvey.
The First Minister knows of the misery being inflicted on the people living in the shadow of the Mossmoran gas plant operated by ExxonMobil, one of the world's most notorious corporate promoters of climate denial. They've failed to maintain the plant, and as a result, local residents endure regular unplanned flaring. The plant's operating permits have been breached. SEPA have issued final warning notices, and in view of the health impacts, NHS Fife has called the flaring unacceptable. The plant is currently shut down, but a restart is imminent, and the Scottish Greens have called for the community at least to be given a break over the holidays. So far, ExxonMobil have only committed not to restart from Christmas Eve to Boxing Day. Will the First Minister join me in calling on the operators to commit to no flaring over the entire Christmas and New Year period?
First Minister.
On the specific question that Patrick Harvey has raised there, I will undertake to ensure that that is discussed with SEPA and that in turn it is discussed with the company. I, on the face of it, don't think that is an entirely unreasonable request from the local community, because I do appreciate the concerns and the anxieties, very understandable concerns and anxieties of the local community regarding flaring at the Mossmoran complex. The recent frequency of unplanned flaring has been completely unacceptable, and SEPA and the Health and Safety Executive are monitoring developments closely as the plant restarts, and certainly that has to be done with, I think, minimum impact and in a way that reduces the anxiety of the local community. So I'm happy to take that particular request forward and feedback to Patrick Harvey once I've had a chance to do so.
Patrick Harvey.
Well, I think the community will think it's more than reasonable. I think they'll think it's absolutely necessary that we get this commitment from the plant operator before the Christmas holidays. On Channel 4's climate debate last week, the First Minister stated, "We are in the transition." Well, Mossmoran is the second biggest polluter in Scotland, and many local people in Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath know that this is not the future their community deserves. They demand climate action, and to see that just transition taking place now and a Green New Deal for Fife. So can the First Minister tell the communities surrounding Mossmoran and the workforce, when will they see a just transition for Cowdenbeath actually get underway? What investment will be provided for an alternative future and lasting green jobs instead of corporations which profit from wrecking people's lives and our climate?
First Minister.
That is a just transition that is underway. It's exactly to look at these issues of the justice of the transition that we established the Just Transition Commission. I mean, there are 170 or so jobs currently provided by Mossmoran right now. Of course, we all want to see the move to a greener energy system, and it's important that we do that in a way that provides new jobs. That's why we are investing so much in support for renewable energy, and we need to accelerate that. So I'm absolutely in agreement with Patrick Harvey about this, but in terms of the transition, we've seen from past economic transformations what happens if we don't take people with us and leave them behind, and we mustn't repeat those mistakes, which is why accelerating that transition but doing it fairly and justly is so important.
Question for Willie Rennie.
The police is in crisis once again. With the resignation of Susan Deacon, that's now 3 chief constables, 3 chairs and 4 chief executives in just a few short years. Today we learn the Inspectorate don't think the authority either supports the police or scrutinises the police. Yet the Justice Secretary thinks the organisation is in a good place. Isn't this just a toxic mix of chaos and complacency?
First Minister.
No, and I have to say to Willie Rennie, the police is not in crisis, and I think it does a disservice to the police officers around our country working so hard to keep us safe to say so. The chair of the SPA has tendered a resignation. She has her own reasons for doing that, but as I said a few moments ago, the Vice Chair will take over the leadership of the Police Authority until a replacement is appointed through the appointments process. In the meantime, the SPA will go on with the job of responding to the recommendations that have been made by this Parliament's committee, by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, continuing the improvements that are being made to governance and accountability, and we will continue to support the police officers of our country doing the fantastic job that they do day in and day out, keeping crime levels low and making sure that the public of Scotland are kept safe. And I think all of us actually should thank them for doing that.
Willie Rennie.
Tell that to the third of police officers who are turning up to work mentally unwell. This government is not supporting the police. That's the last thing they are doing. The First Minister is in cloud cuckoo land if she is satisfied with this. Last week, the Justice Secretary said he was very satisfied with police mental health, but only 3% of police officers agreed with him. This week, the First Minister said violent crime was down when it's on the rise. Now the First Minister tells us the centralised functions of the Scottish Police Authority are sound. This government is way out of touch and it's way out of its depth. Ministers appointed all of these people, every single one of them, and left us with this mess of name-calling and crisis. How many more years do we have to put up with this chaos? Centralisation has undermined our police. Why won't the First Minister just admit it, that she is wrong, and scrap the Police Act?
First Minister.
Well, let me deal with the issues that I think Willie Rennie was raising in that question. Firstly, I outlined to him last week the number of initiatives that are being taken to support the health and well-being of our police officers. This government has invested in and supported 1,000 extra police officers on the streets of Scotland, while elsewhere in the UK police officer numbers were being slashed. We've delivered the best pay rise for the police of any police service across the UK. We will continue to support our police officers to do the fantastic work that they do to get crime levels down and keep the public of Scotland safe. But I have to say, Presiding Officer, on the morning after, the leader of the Liberal Democrats was forced to apologise for the Liberal Democrats' support of Tory austerity, which has had such a damaging impact on our public services. I thought Willie Rennie might have had a bit more humility when he was talking about public services this morning.
We have some further supplementary questions. The first from Rhoda Grant, to be followed by Annie Wells. Rhoda Grant.
CS Wind in Campbelltown is set to pay off 80% of its workforce, with a quarter of them being made redundant earlier this week. This has a terrible impact on the workers, their families and indeed the whole community in Kintyre. What is the Scottish Government going to do to ensure that developers include local content and contracts that are let in Scotland to make sure that we all benefit from our natural resources?
First Minister.
Well, obviously the situation with CS Wind is extremely concerning and extremely regrettable, and my thoughts are with the workforce of that company. PACE support has been provided to the workforce. I understand that support has been received positively. In a broader sense, Fergus Ewing has already convened a summit in Campbelltown in order to look at the implications of this and other recent economic developments. A working group has been established to make sure that we're focusing on the actions that we need to take to generate economic activity in Campbelltown, because we understand the blow that a closure like this, or redundancies on this scale, will have in a community of this size. But Fergus Ewing will be leading that work in the months to come, and we'll be happy to keep the Parliament updated.
Annie Wells, to be followed by Keith Brown.
First Minister, how many children and young people in Scotland are having to wait more than a year for mental health treatment?
First Minister.
Too many children wait more than a year for mental health treatment. That is why we're investing £250 million in improvements to child and adolescent mental health services to reduce waiting times in the specialist service, but crucially to build up community services, to get counsellors into schools, which is work that is ongoing, to establish the new community wellbeing service, so that there are more services and resources available for young people in the community, that then ensures that specialist services are there for those who need it. So that work is extremely important. It's backed by investment, and the Government will continue to take it forward.
Keith Brown, to be followed by Ross Greer.
Can I ask the First Minister what her response is to the recently published ONS report that has cut life expectancy for children born in the UK? The UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights report published earlier this year accused the Tory government of the systematic immiseration of a significant part of the British population. The findings in the ONS report coincide with the introduction of the Tory party's austerity and welfare reform obsession. How many more authoritative reports does she believe it will take to shame the Tory politicians into admitting that their government policies have forced many in my constituency and across Scotland and the UK into poverty?
First Minister.
The findings of the ONS report are deeply concerning and alarming, and they really do illustrate the fact that austerity, welfare cuts, policies like universal credit and the bedroom tax have all helped to push people in general and children in particular into poverty. The Resolution Foundation has also said that the Conservative manifesto plans at this election risk taking child poverty in Scotland to a 60-year high. That, in my view, is why we need to get rid of a Conservative government at this election, because I don't think we'll ever shame the Conservatives into doing the right thing on poverty. We need to get rid of them completely, and Scotland has an opportunity to do that next week.
Ross Greer, to be followed by Claire Adamson.
Thank you. After a long-running freedom of information saga, I confirmed that in 2009, Chemring Energetics successfully applied for Scottish enterprise funding to invest in site expansion to, in their own words, take advantage of market moves that have resulted in gaps in the manufacture of explosives. The Chemring site in question specialises in components for, again in their own words, rocket propulsion systems, release of airborne weapons systems, missile guidance systems, arming units and military demolition. The First Minister has repeatedly claimed that the Scottish Government does not fund the manufacture of munitions. Is it seriously her position that funding the expansion of a bomb-making factory is different to funding the direct manufacture of bombs?
First Minister.
I'm happy to respond to Ross Greer in more detail about the specific company, but it is absolutely the position that the Scottish Government does not provide funding for the manufacture of munitions, either directly or via Scottish enterprise. Support provided is focused on helping firms to diversify and develop non-military applications for their technology. That is the position of Scottish enterprise in relation to all companies that apply to it for funding. And on the specific company that Ross Greer has raised, I'm happy to respond in more detail in writing.
Claire Adamson, to be followed by Jenny Mara.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Is the First Minister aware of the comments this week from the independent health think tank, the Nuffield Trust, that warned that ending freedom of movement of EU citizens poses a very real risk to NHS staffing numbers? And does the First Minister agree that Scotland needs to escape Brexit and protect our public services?
First Minister.
I think we should take the warning of the Nuffield Trust very seriously. We know that ending freedom of movement will have an impact on our ability to grow our working age population, and that will have perhaps a disproportionate impact on the ability of the NHS and other public services to attract and recruit the staff that they need. Beyond that, I think ending freedom of movement sends the wrong signal about the kind of country we are. We want to be a country that is open, outward-looking and welcoming. I think we should do that in line with our values as a country, but we need to be able to do that to attract the people that we need to have a growing and thriving economy. And I hope all parties in this chamber will reject policies like ending freedom of movement, policies like a hostile environment, and be determined that we keep ensuring that Scotland is the kind of country that attracts people from all over the world to make the amazing contribution that immigrants make to our economy and to our society.
Jenny Mara, to be followed by Liam Kerr.
Presiding Officer, last weekend, 3 people lost their lives in the community of Lochee, Dundee, due to drugs. Drugs workers predict that Scotland's drugs deaths rate, the worst in the world, will rise again this year. Dundee's Drug Commission laid out 10 immediate and emergency recommendations, including same-day prescribing, in August this year. But not one of those recommendations, including that life-saving recommendation of same-day prescribing, has been implemented. I do not understand why. First Minister, for families across Dundee and Scotland, can you please urge the NHS in Tayside and the Council to move forward with these life-saving recommendations as soon as possible?
First Minister.
The Public Health Minister has engaged already with the Dundee Drugs Commission, I think rightly so. It made a number of important recommendations, and I think it is important that we move forward with those recommendations as quickly as is feasible to do. I'm more than happy to get Joe Fitzpatrick to write to the member with an update of how that work is being taken forward, as well as an update on how the work of our wider drugs deaths task force is being taken forward, because this is undoubtedly one of the most important issues that we face, and we are determined to introduce the changes to how we deal with drugs misuse and how we support the users of drugs to make sure that we make a difference to these figures.
Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, in an answer to Willie Rennie on the SPA, the First Minister said there was no crisis. In the Chair's resignation letter, she said that the governance and accountability arrangements for policing in Scotland are fundamentally flawed in structure, culture and practice. Given these comments, will the First Minister and her Justice Secretary carry out an immediate review to learn what has gone wrong with the SNP's centralisation project, why another senior figure in public life has quit, and what can be done to fix her government's mess?
First Minister.
Look, Susan Deakin is absolutely entitled to her opinion on that, and I am very happy to hear the basis on which she has reached that conclusion. But I do not agree with that conclusion. There has been no shortage of reviews of and inquiries into the Scottish Police Authority. Recommendations have been made which have been taken forward, and of course we see improvements that have been made which are recognised by Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary. So we will continue to take forward those improvements, of course listening to the views of Susan Deakin and others. But I think it is doing a better service to our police officers working so hard across the country if we support them in that job and support the Scottish Police Authority to get on with the essential job of scrutiny and accountability that they carry out.
Question number 5, Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government is doing to reduce the disability employment gap.
First Minister.
In December 2018, we published a Fairer Scotland for Disabled People, an employment action plan setting out the steps we will take to reduce the disability employment gap in Scotland by at least half. That includes setting a target for the employment of disabled people within the Scottish Government's own workforce, as published in the Recruitment and Retention Plan for Disabled People. Although there's been a small reduction in the disability employment gap in recent years, we recognise there's still a significant amount of work to do, and we'll be publishing the first annual progress report on the action plan early next year.
Chair McMillan.
Thank the First Minister for that reply. And the First Minister will be aware that Sunday the 1st of December marked the International Day of Persons with Disabilities, and I welcome the Scottish Parliament's new powers over disability benefits so Scotland can put dignity and respect at the heart of our welfare system. Does the First Minister agree with me that more modern apprenticeships for people with additional support needs, possibly tied in with environmental projects, could be one way of increasing the level of people with disabilities in employment?
First Minister.
Yes, I do agree with that. Through the Modern Apprenticeship Equality Action Plan, we offer enhanced contribution rates for modern apprentices that self-identify as disabled. In 2018-19, 3,700 modern apprenticeship starts identified as having an impairment, health condition or learning difficulty, and that's up from 990 in 2015-16 when the plan was introduced. Over 60% of modern apprentice frameworks now include outcomes or units that reference low carbon, sustainability or energy efficiency. There is still a lot of work to be done here, and we will continue to work with employers to further reduce the disability employment gap.
Jeremy Balfour.
Does the First Minister admit she is failing Scottish disabled people with a current disability employment gap of 35.8%, woefully lagging behind the UK figure of 28.9%?
First Minister.
Well, of course, the disability employment gap in Scotland, as I said in my original answer, has reduced. The reduction is too small, but it's reduced from over 37% in 2016 to 35.5% now. We want to drive that further down, which is why we're taking the range of actions that are set out in the action plan, some of which I've touched on today. I think, though, given some of the pressures that have been on people with disabilities from welfare cuts, all of us have to recognise the responsibility to treat disabled people with dignity and to support them into employment wherever possible. And I think that's a lesson that we certainly take seriously, but it's a lesson that I think could well be learned by the current Conservative government at Westminster.
Question number 6, Jamie Green.
To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to Macmillan Cancer Support Study, which suggests that there's been a 15% increase in cancer diagnosis since 2015.
First Minister.
I thank Macmillan for what is an important report. Increasing numbers of people are being diagnosed with cancer, partly due to the ageing population, but also, of course, due to improved detection. The Detect Cancer Early and screening programmes are increasing the proportion of breast, bowel and lung cancers that are detected at early stages. We're working to ensure we have the right staff in place to respond to this. NHS Scotland's staffing levels are higher than ever, and we're working in partnership with Macmillan to ensure that every cancer patient has access to a dedicated support worker, which of course frees clinical staff time for healthcare. It is our ambition, it should be everybody's ambition, to beat cancer and support every person who is fighting it. And I am very encouraged that we're seeing a continued downward trend in cancer mortality rates.
Jamie Green.
Can I thank the First Minister for those words? Macmillan's figures show that 250,000 people are now living with cancer in Scotland, and that number is expected to rise to 300,000 by 2025. And I know that this is an issue which has affected many of us in this chamber. We also commend the hard work and care that our NHS staff and the third sector provide those living with cancer. But First Minister, the numbers do speak for themselves. In a recent cancer patient survey, 40% of patients said that they felt that they were not receiving enough care or support. 60% of nurses say that they feel under too much pressure, and there has been a 26% increase in nurse vacancies, which undeniably is adding pressure to staff. Janice Preston, who heads Macmillan in Scotland, said the following of staff: "They are struggling under the weight of the ever-increasing numbers of people who they need to help, and it's heartbreaking to hear from staff who feel like they are failing cancer patients because they just don't have enough time." First Minister, how do you respond to that comment? And why do you think that so many cancer patients feel like they are not getting the care and support that they need?
First Minister.
Well, every cancer patient should get the quality of care and also support, because I think that is an important distinction that they need. Staff numbers in our NHS generally are at a record high. We saw that in the figures published this week. But in terms of cancer specifically, there's been since 2006 an 80% increase in consultant oncologists working in our NHS and an almost 50%, 48.7% increase in consultant radiologists. So we need to continue to increase the numbers of staff in our health service. But I mentioned in my original answer the partnership between the Scottish Government and Macmillan, which is a pioneering partnership, the first part of the UK to do this, to make sure that we are investing jointly to ensure that every single cancer patient has access to a dedicated support worker. That's something that was widely and warmly welcomed when the Health Secretary and I announced it with Macmillan recently. And that's important for two reasons, because it does give cancer patients access to the emotional support that they need. And as the member rightly says, there's not a single one of us in this chamber who doesn't know through family and friends the emotional impact that cancer has. But crucially, that kind of service also then helps to free up the time of clinicians to focus on the clinical and healthcare aspects of treatment. So these are important issues. I thank Jamie Green for raising them today, but both in terms of the increase in clinical workers in our health service, but this pioneering project and partnership with Macmillan, I do believe will make a real and tangible and meaningful difference to cancer patients in the years to come.
David Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be well aware that positron emission tomography scanners are a vital tool in cancer treatment, but they're all concentrated south of the Highland Line. Will the First Minister support my campaign to have a PET scanner within the Highlands and Islands to help cancer diagnosis and send a message about sharing out health services throughout the whole of Scotland and avoiding centralisation?
First Minister.
I absolutely understand the importance of PET scanning. We want to make sure that people have access to that kind of scanning and, of course, access to treatment as close to home as possible. We'll consider all of these issues in our capital investment programme. I'm not aware of Dave Stewart's campaign in the specifics, but I'm happy to have a look at that and discuss with the Health Secretary, who will discuss with the local health board. But there has been a range of initiatives in recent years in the provision of cancer services that are about making sure that people get access as close to home as possible, recognising that people need the highest quality specialist care where that is best provided. So I'm happy to ask the Health Secretary to liaise further with the member about the specific provision of a scanner in his own region.
And question 7, Colin Smith.
Thank you, First Minister. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to reports that ScotRail fares will increase by 2.4% in January.
First Minister.
Well, no increase in rail fares are ever welcome for the travelling public, and I absolutely recognise that. But this Government has taken action to keep fares down. Regulated ScotRail peak fares are capped at the level of the retail price index, and regulated off-peak fares at 1% below RPI, making fares 20% cheaper on average than they are in the rest of Great Britain.
Colin Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, under your government, regulated rail fares have rocketed by 54%. That's a massive £1,500 hike for a season ticket for a worker travelling between Glasgow and Edinburgh. It's gone up by 13% alone under the current Abellio franchise. Now, given the fact that this franchise has never hit a single punctuality target since the first year of the franchise, why are Scotland's long-suffering rail passengers being hit by yet another fare hike? Why does the First Minister think passengers and not the private rail firms should have to pay the price of Abellio's and this government's failure in running our railways?
First Minister.
Well, of course, two-thirds of the cost of running the railway is already met through the Scottish Government, the subsidy we provide to our rail services. It is also the case that because of the capping arrangements on rail fares, fares are on average 20% cheaper in Scotland than they are elsewhere in Great Britain. No increase in rail fares is welcome. That is why we take the action we do to keep them as low as possible. And we'll continue to do that, just as we will continue to make sure that the franchise holder delivers the improvements in the quality of service that they are committed to delivering. And of course, we'll continue to take forward longer-term plans looking at the possibility of a public sector bidder for the franchise franchise in future. So these are hard actions that we will continue to take. I think they are right and they balance the need to have proper funding in our rail service with keeping fares for the travelling public as low as possible.
Thank you very much, and that concludes First Minister's questions. We're going to move on shortly to a members' business debate in the name of Claire Baker on Scan Art in Action campaign, but we'll just have a short suspension to allow members, ministers and members of the gallery to reach.
Well, it's lovely to be out on such a sunny evening in Edinburgh, but it's a shame that we have to be out tonight protesting against the two-child cap and the rate clause, well more than a year since Alison Thulis, my colleague at Westminster, first spotted it in the small print of a Tory budget.
Very glad to see such a huge demonstration today and so many people still coming along 1 year after the rate clause came into force to show their
work that's been done by Broadcasting Scotland in giving community activists, yes activists, Scottish activists a platform other than the traditional media outlets.